Of all the voices that have shaped modern politics, few are as instantly recognizable as Donald Trump's. His speeches, his rallies, his off-the-cuff remarks, whether you love them or hate them, there's no denying they have a distinct rhythm, a signature style that's hard to ignore. But what if that style isn't just unique, but actually unusual, oddly adolescent even? That's exactly what some language experts argue, and tonight we're diving into why Trump's way of speaking has caught the attention of linguists, psychologists, and communication specialists alike. Think about it. Most politicians use formal, polished language. They rely on carefully crafted speeches, complex sentences, and sophisticated rhetoric to persuade the public. Trump, on the other hand, throws all of that out the window. His words are simple, his phrases short, his tone unpredictable. He repeats himself. He interrupts himself. He uses a kind of playground bravado. Lots of losers, sad, the best, the worst. It's the kind of language you might expect from a teenager boasting on social media, not from a president addressing the nation. And yet, somehow, it works. His words connect, his base listens, and millions of people hang on every sentence, whether in admiration or frustration. So what is it about Trump's speech patterns that make them so different? Some experts say it's a mix of confidence, showmanship, and a deep understanding of how to hold an audience's attention. Others believe it taps into something much simpler, an emotional, instinctive way of speaking that bypasses logic and hits people where they feel it the most. But then there's another side to this conversation. Could this style, this oddly adolescent way of speaking, actually be a deliberate strategy, or is it just who Trump naturally is? Tonight, we'll hear from language experts who have spent years analyzing his words, breaking down the patterns, and uncovering the psychology behind his communication style. And by the end of this video, you might just see his speeches in a whole new light. But before we get there, let's take a closer look at some of his most famous statements, the ones that made headlines, sparked debates, and left people wondering, is this genius, chaos, or something in between? Let's find out. To really understand why Trump's way of speaking is so unusual, we need to look at how most public figures, especially politicians, communicate. Traditionally, leaders are trained to speak in a measured, structured way. They use formal language, carefully chosen words, and calculated pauses to sound thoughtful and authoritative. Their speeches are filled with data, historical references, and carefully crafted arguments meant to persuade different groups of people. But Trump, he throws all of that out completely. His words are raw, emotional, and often feel improvised, as if he's thinking out loud in real time. Take one of his most well-known phrases. Many people are saying, it's vague, it's indirect, and it leaves room for interpretation. He doesn't cite sources or give specifics, yet somehow it creates the impression that he has inside information. Then there's his use of repetition. It's going to be great, really great, the best. In traditional political speech, repetition is used for emphasis, but Trump uses it in a way that feels almost hypnotic, reinforcing his points over and over. This pattern isn't accidental. Language experts have pointed out that this kind of communication mirrors the way people speak in casual conversations: simple words, short phrases, and lots of energy. It's the way you'd talk to a friend, not the way a president would normally address a country. But that's where the real mystery begins. Is this an intentional strategy, or is it just his natural way of talking? Some analysts believe Trump's background in entertainment shaped his speech patterns. Before politics, he was a businessman, a TV personality, a master of branding. On The Apprentice, he didn't need long, drawn-out explanations. He needed catchphrases that stuck. You're fired. 2 words, and yet instantly unforgettable. The same idea carried over into his rallies and press conferences. Simple, direct, emotional. But does that mean he's deliberately using a language style designed to connect on a deeper, almost subconscious level? Then there's the other possibility. What if this is just how he thinks? Some studies have analyzed Trump's speech over the years, comparing interviews from decades ago to his more recent public appearances. What they found is interesting. His vocabulary, sentence structure, and fluency seem to have changed over time. His sentences have become shorter, his words more repetitive, his points less complex. Could this be a shift in strategy? Or is there something else going on? We'll take a closer look at that next. But first, let's break down some of his most viral moments, those speeches and interviews that left everyone talking. What do they reveal about the man behind the words? Let's find out. One of the most fascinating aspects of Trump's speech isn't just how he talks, but how people react to it. To his supporters, his way of speaking is refreshing. He's not polished, he's not scripted, and he doesn't sound like a typical politician. They see his language as proof that he's authentic, someone who tells it like it is. His simple words make complex issues seem easy to understand, cutting through the noise of politics in a way that feels direct and personal. For many, that's part of his appeal. He doesn't talk down to them. He sounds like one of them. But to his critics, this same style feels chaotic, unstructured, even dangerous. They argue that his vagueness, his constant use of exaggeration, and his tendency to avoid specifics leave too much room for confusion. Instead of clarity, they see manipulation, an ability to make claims without ever being tied to concrete facts. And then there's the way he responds to questions. In traditional interviews, politicians are expected to give clear answers, even if they're carefully avoiding certain topics. Trump, however, often answers questions with unrelated statements, jumping from one thought to another, sometimes contradicting himself within the same conversation. Linguists call this a discourse shift, a way of redirecting a conversation without directly addressing the original point. It's a technique that can be used intentionally to avoid tough questions, or unintentionally, as a sign of someone thinking out loud without a filter. Either way, it leaves journalists, analysts, and even his own advisors struggling to pin down exactly what he means at any given moment. But perhaps the biggest question is, does this style of speaking actually make him more powerful? In many ways, it does. By keeping his language broad and open-ended, he allows different people to interpret his words in different ways. When he says something like, "We're going to do something incredible, something big," his supporters hear a promise of action, even if no specifics are given. At the same time, if he's criticized for a statement, he can later claim he was misunderstood, misquoted, or taken out of context. This ability to speak in a way that both energizes his base and creates enough ambiguity to avoid direct accountability is something that has kept him in the spotlight for years. But is this style of speaking a strength, or is it a weakness? Some experts believe that over time, the unpredictability of his words could work against him. Others argue that in an era where attention spans are shrinking and social media rewards sound bites over substance, Trump's way of speaking is perfectly suited for the modern political landscape. But there's something even more surprising. When you compare his speech patterns to other world leaders, the differences are even more dramatic. And that raises an even bigger question. Does the way a leader speaks shape the way they lead? That's what we'll explore next. As Trump's words continue to spark debate, the question of whether his speech style is an asset or a liability becomes even more urgent. The stakes are high, not just for him, but for the way political communication is evolving. His speeches, his interviews, even his offhand remarks have a way of dominating headlines, setting the narrative, and forcing the media into a cycle of reacting rather than leading the conversation. Whether it's intentional or instinctive, his ability to control public discourse is undeniable. But as we look closer, a deeper conflict begins to emerge. One that goes beyond politics and into the very nature of how people interpret language itself. Some linguists argue that Trump's way of speaking isn't just simple, it's unpredictable. He defies the traditional rules of conversation, often shifting between topics without clear transitions. This keeps his audience engaged, but it also makes it difficult to hold him accountable for specific statements. His words, depending on who's listening, can mean different things to different people. When he repeats phrases like, "A lot of people are saying," or "believe me," he's reinforcing his point without offering evidence, making it easy for supporters to believe and critics to dismiss. And in a world where perception shapes reality, that ability to blur the line between fact and feeling is powerful. But the real tension lies in what happens when that style of communication is tested in high-stakes moments. When challenged directly, whether by journalists, political opponents, or even his own advisors, Trump's responses can vary wildly. Sometimes he doubles down, repeating his point with even more confidence. Other times he pivots entirely, moving the conversation in an entirely new direction. This unpredictability has led to some of the most intense and scrutinized moments of his presidency, moments where his words alone had the potential to shift markets, influence foreign policy, or fuel public unrest. And yet, even as analysts dissect his speech patterns, trying to determine whether they are calculated or impulsive, the one thing that remains constant is the impact. Whether he's addressing a crowd at a rally, engaging in a heated debate, or sending out a single tweet, his words ripple through the political landscape, forcing reactions, shaping opinions, and keeping him at the center of the conversation. But now, as we reach the most critical point in this analysis, one final question remains. Does the power of his words come from their simplicity or from something much deeper? And if his way of speaking is so effective, what does that mean for the future of political leadership? The answer is more complex than it seems, and what we're about to uncover might change the way you look at language forever. Just when it seems like we've unraveled the mystery behind Trump's way of speaking, another layer emerges, one that complicates everything we thought we knew. If his speech style is a tool, whether instinctive or strategic, then the next question is, how far does its influence actually reach? And what happens when that influence collides with reality? Here's where things take an unexpected turn. For years, Trump's words have shaped public perception, but they've also tested the limits of what a leader can say without immediate consequences. While some see his loose, unscripted style as a sign of authenticity, others argue that words spoken from a position of power carry weight, whether intentional or not. And as history has shown, a leader's language can have far-reaching effects on markets, policies, and even the behavior of those who follow them. Consider this. Throughout his career, Trump has built his brand on confidence. His language is filled with certainty, strong statements, bold declarations, sweeping promises. But when those words meet resistance, when the world pushes back with facts, scrutiny, or unexpected consequences, what happens next? Sometimes he leans in harder, repeating the same phrases with even more force. Other times, he shifts the narrative entirely, leaving behind unfinished debates as he moves on to the next topic. This creates an unusual dynamic, one where his words hold immense power in the moment, yet often remain just vague enough to be reinterpreted later. And this is where the real twist unfolds. His speech style isn't just shaping how people hear him, it's shaping how they remember him. Studies show that people tend to recall the emotions behind words more than the details of what was actually said. By using repetition, high-energy phrases, and emotionally charged language, Trump's words don't just communicate a message, they leave an impression. This means that even when he contradicts himself or changes his stance, the emotional impact of his words can remain, solidifying loyalty among supporters while frustrating critics who rely on traditional measures of consistency. But this strategy, or natural instinct, comes with risks. The unpredictability that keeps him at the center of attention can also create moments where his words seem to take on a life of their own, leading to misunderstandings, media frenzies, or political firestorms. And now, as we approach the most critical part of this discussion, one question looms over everything. Can a leader's way of speaking be so powerful that it reshapes not only public opinion, but reality itself? That's what we're about to explore next. And what we've uncovered might just be the most surprising revelation yet. And then, just when it seems like we've reached the answer, that Trump's way of speaking is either a masterful strategy or simply his natural instinct, something happens that flips everything upside down. It turns out his speech patterns don't just shape how people perceive him, they actually shape how he perceives himself. Experts have pointed out an unusual phenomenon in his interviews and speeches. His words don't just persuade his audience, they appear to persuade him too. As he speaks, his confidence builds. His phrases start simple, but grow bolder with repetition. An idea that may have started as vague speculation becomes, in his mind, an undeniable fact by the time he's finished saying it. This isn't just a political technique, it's a pattern seen in performers, negotiators, and even salespeople. The more they reinforce their own words, the more they start to believe them. And in Trump's case, this makes every speech, every rally, every interview a moment of real-time persuasion, not just for his followers, but for himself. This revelation changes everything. It means his unpredictability isn't just a tactic to keep people engaged. It's a direct reflection of how his thoughts evolve in the moment. It explains why he can contradict himself without hesitation, because in that instant, the latest version of his statement feels just as real and true as the one before it. It's not about deception in the traditional sense. It's about the fluid nature of belief, reinforced by the power of words spoken with conviction. And that brings us to the final, unexpected twist. If Trump's words shape his own reality as much as they shape public perception, what happens when that reality meets undeniable, unchangeable facts? Over the years, we've seen moments where his confidence collided with situations he couldn't control, times when the power of words alone wasn't enough to shift the course of events. These moments reveal the one real limitation of his speaking style. In a world where language can be endlessly interpreted, reality still holds the final say. But even in those moments, his influence remains. Because if there's one thing we've uncovered, it's that words, especially when spoken with absolute confidence, have the ability to outlast the moment they were said. And that is the true power of speech. Whether intentional or instinctive, Trump's way of speaking has left a mark, not just on politics, but on the way people engage with language itself. And as history continues to unfold, the impact of his words, both past and future, will continue to shape the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the end, what we're left with isn't just an analysis of how Trump speaks, but a deeper understanding of the power of language itself. Words aren't just tools for communication. They shape perception, influence emotions, and even alter reality in the minds of those who hear them. Trump's speech patterns, whether instinctive or strategic, have reshaped the way political messages are delivered and consumed. He's shown that in an age of sound bites and social media, simplicity can be more effective than complexity, and emotion can override logic in ways we don't always recognize in the moment. But this raises an even bigger question. Does this shift in communication change the expectations for future leaders? Will politicians now feel pressured to abandon traditional speech styles in favor of a more conversational, free-flowing approach? Or is Trump's way of speaking unique to him, something that works because of his personality, his background, and the way he connects with his audience? While we don't have a definitive answer, one thing is clear: his impact on political language is undeniable. At the same time, this entire conversation reminds us of something important. How we interpret language is just as significant as how it's spoken. Trump's words, like those of any influential leader, don't exist in isolation. They are filtered through personal beliefs, emotions, and experiences. Supporters hear strength and confidence. Critics hear vagueness and unpredictability. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate takeaway from all of this. Language isn't just about words, it's about the meaning we attach to them. As we step back from this analysis, we're left with one final thought. If words have the power to shape reality, then our responsibility as listeners is just as important as the speaker's responsibility to communicate. Whether we're watching a political speech, reading the news, or even just having a conversation, how we engage with language matters. The way we process words, question them, and seek out deeper understanding is what truly defines their impact. And with that, we close this chapter, knowing that the discussion doesn't really end here. Because as long as language continues to evolve, as long as leaders rise and fall, and as long as words remain the most powerful tool in shaping the world around us, the debate over how they are used and what they really mean will always continue.